Hi, I'm Xian, associate professor from the University of Minnesota, mainly working on drone-on-ground remote sensing for high-throughput phenotyping and precision agriculture. Yeah, I play with the hyperspectral imaging a lot.
My name is Seth Murray. I'm a professor in the Department of Soil and Crop Science at Texas A&M University. I am but a lowly, humble corn breeder and work with drones and nothing nearly as high-tech as multispectral imaging.
All right, I'm Mike Kudenov, professor of electrical and computer engineering at NC State. We primarily support high-throughput phenotyping for various breeding programs at the NC State Plant Science Initiative. And as part of my program, we do a lot of hyperspectral sensing, polarization, fluorescence. So we're more instrumentation and system calibration.
Thanks. My name is Baskar with a very long last name, Ganapathysubramanian. I'm a faculty member at Iowa State University, and I have the privilege of leading a large AI institute for agriculture, where we have a very creative group of about 33 faculty who are both creating a lot of data sets as well as using these data sets to extract out actionable information. So happy to be here.
My name is Nathan Miller. I'm a staff scientist at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I am an electrical and computer engineer and plant physiologist, plant biologist. I build high throughput imaging pipelines for measuring phenotypes.
All right, good job. Okay. So I think for the audience, it would be helpful if you could each comment on how you see research computing. What role does it play in your research now? Like, how does it help you as a scientist? And what do you see the role for research computing in the future, as your program moves forward? So, like 3 to 5 years from now, what do you see the role of research compute in what you do? Okay, anybody? Yeah, go ahead. Anybody can tackle that.
I guess since I have one of the
you drew the short straw. You drew the microphone.
Yeah, so I have the mic, I'll use it. Well, I think from my perspective, it's mostly for data storage and sharing. We have lots of large data sets that we would like to share or contribute, but that's challenging, of course, with Google Drive and Google and Microsoft reducing their quotas and everything, kind of across the board. So we've been learning about Globus, and NC State has resources for that. I suppose long term, I've been working with others at NC State on dashboards. So my job is to fill up the hard drives for other students to make the models. We also do the computer vision assessment, so getting the images into CSVs. And so then downstream of that, it's putting that information into dashboards to make it more actionable for growers and producers. And then I see opportunity there for those cloud-based systems and dashboards to either serve as a foundation for startup companies or just as a service to growers and producers. So mostly looking at sweet potatoes, but trying to get more insight into their crops so they can make better decisions.
I could not put it better. Awesome. So I think the way I think about it is computing, broadly defined within the plant phenotyping ecosystem, is data curation, collection and curation, data analysis, and then consumption, right? And so from a creation perspective, we write in our grants that we're going to store the data for 3 years, right? What happens after, right? There's a lot of dark data that's coming in, so we got to figure out how. And research computing is perhaps the one-stop shop that could allow us to store this data persistently. Second is in terms of computing. I think for us to bridge the gap between research computing and a domain scientist being easy to enabling domain scientists to more flexibly use it, we had to modularize things. We need to come up with Lego-like features that can be easily stacked together, that can be deployed at scale. And third is how do you deploy this, right? How do end users who are not necessarily interested in learning how MPI works, right, or how OpenMP works, right, but we just want to solve the science problems. How do you enable them to use it? So I think this is where that bridging the gap, the long tail of science, this is the open challenges I think persist still persist.
Going next. I would like to see computing not exist. What I mean by that is I don't want to focus on it. I want to focus on plants. And I think the idea being that, for example, I woke up this morning in a bed that didn't exist and went down an elevator that didn't exist and got out of a hotel that didn't exist because I didn't think about them. I didn't wake up wondering, is the elevator going to work today? And for that reason, I think it might be helpful for a future goal to have computing not exist and have us be focusing on the plant science, which is what we're here to do, which is plant phenotyping and plant modeling. So that's the direction I hope that we're moving. And in order for it to not exist, it has to exist really well first. So
I'm glad I let you go first because this follows a complete continuum of, focused on computing to increasingly decreasingly focused on computing. Just out of curiosity, how many of you thought about where our lunch came from, like the ingredients in our lunch? Yeah, 0? That would be the analogy I was going to make is, that's sort of what I want to think about computing and computing resources. If you don't think about agriculture, which is what I think about most of the time, I don't necessarily want to think about computing or how our car works, right? Or the elevator or the bed problem. But currently we have to, if we're trying to do current, cutting edge methods in plant science, there is no easy button. And once there is an easy button, then it becomes sort of Me Too science and it becomes the domain of industry or something like that. So there is sort of this right balance of having to think about these problems that are difficult enough that not everybody can solve them, but not so difficult that you need to spend all your time worrying about the computation unless you have good collaborators, Josh, or, Noah sort of talked about that this morning.
I think, yeah, you already covered a lot of things that, I never thought about. But I agree on several points. For example, the data storage and sharing, because my group also collected a lot of data. I think my data are high quality because we purely rely on my group members to do all the work from the plant trials of the crop trials, of course, are from collaborators field, and they provide us field scores for as ground truth. Although probably you don't agree, that's a good ground truth. Anyways, and then my group will go out and collect quality data, and then we do all the data annotation by ourselves, and then we use the data to produce good models. We typically produce very good models, although I would say there's a trust issue most of the time between the phenotyping people like me and breeders who are willing to collaborate, but still not willing to use our model, which showed workable and probably they think is still not reliable or robust enough because of the short time period that the data represents 3 years, for example, for a funded project. Even so, I think the goal is to make it consistent, to keep improving the model and show its robustness, and until someday that our collaborator can really trust what we are doing. That's one thing. Another thing is I see the gap, I see the gap between our solutions for breeders and pathologists and our solution for farmers. Yeah, so we can develop some good tools that the breeders, meet the breeders' requirement. But when we talk to farmers, it's a different story. They want something more like on the dashboard showing a very simple, a binary type of result or decision recommendation for them to use to go further. to have some real action in their field. So that's the very different part. So what type of customers or people are we serving for? I think every one of us need to think about it. Yeah, before trying to develop like a final solution. Yeah, for our project.
Questions? Questions for the panel? Oh,
Thank you everyone for sharing your lovely thoughts. And I do agree, like, for the computing to not to exist, but in the current world, before computing not to exist, it has to go better, or like you'll have to have a one domain solution, like where you're putting your problem, and based on that, it's choosing the computing type to run your calculations for you. And but my question is on the side of things, like, as I'm guessing, like, all of you guys deal with the big data, and then you got introduced to the computing side. But out of your science domain, how many of your fellow colleagues or researchers would you say, like, they don't know much about computing, and how they are getting introduced to the computing? Do you see a gap over there, like where, like, people like me or people like us, like who are coming from RCA background or computing background, who can do the more introduction type of thing, like what type of computing is best for you? Like, do you see a need, or do you see like how, like, there's a gap exists? Like, what's your point of view on that? Thank you.
I'll take that one first. I'm going to link this to a word I heard over here about trust. I think the first level of exchange is data, one up is modeling, and one higher than this is concept. In other words, understanding what is happening behind the scenes in order to build the trust and to exchange at a higher level of conceptual understanding. I think there's a very important currency, which is experience. So as a person who was very fortunate to be embedded in a cross-discipline setting at a university, if there are any engineers or mathematicians or computer scientists, please go out into the field with your breeders. Do not only look at data. When you go out into the field, and don't do a day visit, don't do a week visit, do a month visit, sweat, work, do pollination, do harvest, put time in at the field. And if breeding is not your thing, and if plant biology is, then grow a Arabidopsis if that's your model organism. Go do plant science if you're an engineer or a mathematician or a computer scientist. And the reason I believe this is important is because of trust, is because we need to trust each other, which means we need a shared experience, we need a shared language. And in order for that to occur, we have to leave our comfort zone. So this is, I'm offering up this as a suggestion as to build higher level concepts above data and fill those gaps and establish trust.
I'll just go back to your question. And I agree with all that. Most of my colleagues, when you say computing, they think about the IT guy who's supposed to come and solve their problems, right? Like, I don't think there's any concept of computing other than that's the thing that happens on the other side of campus, right? And most people are running analysis on their, Windows, maybe even XP machine, right? So when you talk about plant scientists, there is the new generation's different. So I think probably right around I graduated in 2008 with my PhD, and right around then I started seeing sort of a shift. And now I think a lot of students are trained, but most of the faculty at most institutions, you're having a conversation with them is like, totally different worlds. Now, my group has started moving from local compute. Aaron, who was here earlier, fantastic grad student, starting to move things into high performance computing. But that's only because he's doing deep learning analysis. Most of our analysis software still is better just run on our local computers because we're running tabular data. It's only once you start going to deep learning type image-based data that any plant scientist would care, and there's very few plant scientists who are still doing that. So I think there's a long way to go before plant scientists really need to care about, or most of the faculty need to care about this. But the grad students and the postdocs and the assistant professors are the ones to really get involved. Does that answer the subject of your question? Okay.
That can act as a bridge between like the science domain and the computing world?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. So our first project was in 2016, our big transdisciplinary project. So an aerospace engineer, an ag engineer, and myself wrote it. I and the aerospace engineer have zero in common as a plant scientist and aerospace engineer. The ag engineer was really the key to translating. And that's why I'm a huge fan of agricultural engineers. I think they're the perfect bridge. But trying to bring, for the most part, bringing like a computer scientist and a plant scientist together, I would discourage it because I think you're just going to get frustration unless you have like an ag engineer or somebody who's worked in that transdisciplinary aspect who understands that there's a huge cultural difference there. I mean, you saw what Josh was presenting today as, the things he's excited about, those papers. My colleagues would go, conference papers, that's not right. But in computer science, that's huge. Whereas, a computer scientist might be like, crop science or the Journal of Plant Registration, who cares? The impact factor is like 0.6 on that. Right? But for my field, that's a huge deal to have a plant variety released. So just two different worlds, and ag engineers I think, do a better job than most at bridging that.
Thank you.
Maybe can I add to that? I think Seth had a good point about having building a shared language, and Nate also talked about that anecdote, right? So I work closely with a very creative colleague of mine who's a plant breeder, and first time we were talking about insects, she used the word vector. Vector to her meant something very different than a vector to me, right? So it took us a while to figure out that her vector was different from my vector, right? And so, but what really helped was we decided to co-advise students, right? So a student is co-advised, and so either they are in engineering or they are in plant breeding, but then they attend group meetings. It's a bit of a slog, right? So you got to attend 2 group meetings, you got to go to 2 meetings every week or every 2 weeks, and so on. So, but then they come out extremely. They are the next generation, like Seth, you talked about, right? So they speak both languages, and they could serve us as an excellent bridge, right? And then here, one thing that we are seeing now is low code, no code ways of introducing this after you learn the shared language seems to be very powerful, right? So, and that's one way to help folks who are very interested in the domain science problems abstract out the underlying computing through low code, no code efforts.
Okay, there's a question online. So, question is, how can genetic, genomic, and breeding databases like maize GDB, grain genes, soy base assist in phenotyping scientists?
I'll start with my unpopular answer. I'm not sure they can, because they were all designed for the most part with a focus on, I think about maize GB, fantastic resource if you're focusing on individual mutations, if you're focusing on genomics. But I think part of the problem with phenomics and phenotyping is so far most people have seen it in service of genomics. Whereas a breeder, the phenotype has always been the end goal, and genomics was supposed to be a tool to help us get to that end goal. And so I think all those tools need to sort of be reimagined, not just a functionality added. But phenomics, I think, is a different discipline. With genomics, every individual has a SNP at a certain location that's the same. When you start talking about a drone, the date of flight differs. the development stage at that data flight differs because the environment up till then differs. And so I think all these things need to be thought not from a genomic standpoint, but really from a whole novel standpoint. I mean, that's where the transdisciplinary comes in. It's not interdisciplinary, like people just bringing their current expertise. It's actually different groups developing new expertise that never previously existed, in my opinion. So I think we need to rethink this whole aspect of how we're going to store and manage this data, and I think that needs to involve the whole community and not just be commodity specific as well. I think we should learn from what genomics did in the past and not just, reinvent the wheel.
So this is not an answer from me. It's more like an observation that I have. Again, I see gaps between phenotyping and genotyping. Yeah, I only work on phenotyping and ask so many times my colleagues. So how can we correlate the traits that we are working on in the field with what you see from the genomics level in the lab? And so we don't really, we cannot connect the two parts very well. And the only thing we found in common is that they are looking for the traits. And from our image processing point of view, we are also looking for the traits. So if someday the way they are looking at the traits, the phenotyping traits in the field can be replaced by our phenotyping tool, and then we are kind of connecting with their genotyping work. Yeah, that's all I found from my experience.
Questions? Go ahead.
I have a comment about the genotype and phenotype relationship. Again, it's more of a comment than it is an answer. I found the expectations to be very different between the two fields. One type of expectation for genomics is like, genomics is the control mechanism. It's going to cause things to happen. And so there's this expectation of control. How that's going to happen, no one has a clue, because it's very complicated. It's genomics, it's a molecule. Then there's the phenomics, and it's the effect. And so the effect, where is our expectations on the effect? Well, it's not a cause, it's an effect. But our expectations on the phenomics side are like, well, this is so easy. There's a plant, Seth, right there in the drone image. Can't you just find it? And I find the expectations between genomics and phenomics to be maybe something kind of interesting to pay attention to, and kind of how we treat the two different subjects.
Yeah, and I think there's some interesting aspects as well from just the spatial temporal aspect, right? And the amount of ground truthing we can get, and being able to represent that in sort of like a foundational database or something like that. Because we go out there with a drone, once a week, or a satellite flies over once every 2 weeks. Is that really a high enough temporal rate to capture that dip in water moisture, or that spike in daytime temperature, or spike in nighttime temperature, right? We also have a tremendous bias towards measuring everything in the daytime as well. I've done a few 24-hour time course measurements. Those aren't fun. But there are certainly people who look at the clock and these types of things. So there's a tremendous amount of complexity that we're trying to represent, and it's tough to capture that in the sensing. Anyways.
Questions for the panel?
I want to follow up with Baskar's the question before the last question. So my background is on the mechanics side, and my previous supervisor, he also has a newish group who's he's working or collaborating with someone on the plant side, and they're doing the plant failure mechanism, or just finding out that. And the points that you brought up, we actually see that. I used to see that in our group meeting, that there's some, in terms of terminologies, jargons, and all sorts of things, like there's always a mismatch between like the two science domain things. And his collaborator is not in UNL, so they're doing remote collaboration with other universities. What would your suggestions be, like when you approach in terms of, like, say you have people from a mechanical engineering background and then plant scientist? Any suggestions or anything that you'd have apart from the students being working together, so that the language barrier or like the overall mismatch of communication that we have, that can be dealt with, or we have a smoother transition?
Yeah, I can start off. I think this is not fully baked yet, so at least some. I think from I'm going to start at a very high level, right? From a policy standpoint, I think this has to be incentivized, right? So in that, and that's probably not definitely at my level. Maybe Seth, you have the ability, influence to affect policy at an institutional scale, right? So this has to be valued, right? So right now, I publish in CVPR, I get a pat on the back, right? I publish in a plant science journal, my colleagues don't care, right? So how do you incentivize it, right? So that there's a value at the college level, at the university level, that this is valued. So that has to be, and that's, I think, slowly changing. That's one thing, right? But that's probably not what the answer you're looking for. That's the top high level one, right? At the so what that incentive essentially does, at least that did for me, for other colleagues at Iowa State, is it allowed us to be more, allowed us to take more risks, right? So in that, oh, I work with 3 or 4 or 5 people not in my discipline. It's okay if 2 of them, 3 of them don't pan out. I learn something, I put in effort. A student works for 3 years, they graduate with a master's degree, or they work for 5 years. That's probably my only PhD student working in that area in my career, and that's okay, right? So and that's the that's the second, right? That incentive allows you to be more less risk averse, right? And the third is, you just have to, at the individual level, the way I approach this is, I am okay with some collaborations not panning out, right? So we have fun, we talk, there's a shared vision, but the shared vision may not execute. There may be several roadblocks along the way, and nothing you learn is not useful for something else. And that, I think, that philosophy has helped me the last 15 years of my career.
Thank you so much.
It seems like we have time, or okay. I'll just respond to a couple things. So one of the things that Baskar said was, I publish in this journal, and my colleagues don't care, and I would actually say good, right? Because if you have tenure, right, you're supposed to explore new things, and nothing big ever happens. If we only care about the things our colleagues happen, we all do the same stuff. And when we think about creating a new discipline, if somebody at Iowa State's publishing, a computer scientist publishing in a plant publication, and somebody at Texas A&M's doing that, and all of a sudden you have a momentum and you have a new sort of domain or field emerging, right? But one person alone. So we're really working across institutions to sort of make other people care who don't care currently. I think that's great. That's how things get started. And then I guess to Nathan's point, the genomics and phenomics paradigm, when I was in graduate school, I was taught that we were going to understand the function of every gene, right? And that we'd be able to manipulate those through biotechnology or gene editing. And I believe that's a complete myth now. It's still a hypothesis. It's never been proven, right? And we still have a lot of colleagues who are focused on the one gene, one phenotype paradigm, where one gene may have many phenotypes or no phenotypes. They act in networks. So I think the better paradigm to use is when I think about astronomy, right? The way new planets were discovered was because there were new measurement technologies that showed, changes in gravity or distortion or something like that. Those are the things that we should be using these tools to look at, not to remeasure what we've always been measuring, but what new things can we discover that never been able to be discovered before? Genotyping is another great example. People who use arrays, you can only find the SNPs on those arrays. As soon as you use open source or open architecture genotyping, like genotyping by sequencing, you can discover there's all types of stuff in the genome that you never could have before because you're using those new tools, right? Sorry.
I ran out of water, so I'm going to get my coffee, and then I'll be in the audience, and I'll ask a question. So my question for the panel is kind of along those lines, Seth. If we have so much data and so much computation, does anyone care to comment on what's next? And I'll seed it with, is there anything having to do with math? I mean, is this maybe a place that we need to be returning to a chalkboard, dear engineer friends?
I think there are a lot of opportunities for fundamental advances in computing algorithms here. The ones that I'm interested in, for instance, this is my biased view of what the open challenges are, right? So I think multimodality is the, in my mind, the next frontier. So we talked about hyperspectral, we talked about like multiple ways of looking at the plant. How do you fuse them together? How do you make sense of it? How do you interpret it, right? So that's, and then the other thing is in terms of mathematics of uncertainty quantification, right? So everything that from an engineered system perspective, I can define a partial differential equation for a system, right? But from biology, all that is out. So we have to rethink the way we look at these problems. We had to rethink the way we had to come up with algorithms and scalable computing methods that represent uncertainty. And then at the end of the day, we had to figure out how to visualize them, right? So because so these are 3 or 4 challenges I think that dovetail a lot of data, biology, and computing and math. Right? So, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think from the technology development side, it's like as the computing and resources go up, it's like every time you double your CPU, you just make your algorithms more intense. And the same thing is going to be true, and so then your computer never feels faster. The same thing is going to be true, I think, from the sensing side, and we're using hyperspectral imaging and drones and everything like that to get the throughput. But there's just certain measurements that you need to be on the ground for at the plant, destructive, or you're taking samples. There's just things that you can't. You're trying to do so much inference from the hyperspectral that at some point you're going to need these sort of like low power, really highly scalable IoT type devices. You just clip it on the plant and walk away, and it's doing some kind of sensing at the leaf level of the metabolites or something, and then automatically transferring that data to the cloud, right? So we're not necessarily reducing our reliance on the compute, but we're just using it more and more and more and becoming more reliant on it, but also getting a higher, different kind of data, more scalability of that. I don't know, clip a leaf, I don't know, a sensor you clip onto a leaf and then you're getting like RNA as a function of time. I don't know, crazy stuff. But oftentimes with the spectral data or the image data, or the drone imagery, lots of drone companies failed because they just don't know what's going on at the plant. So it's really about scaling up that really high level ground truth data, I think.
So yeah, from my again personal experience in the doing research in the past almost 10 years already, I started with the drone remote sensing, and now we are gradually coming down to the ground. Yeah, because of that uncertainty from the purely drone platform. Although we use hyperspectral imaging, and I trust my algorithms that we develop in my lab, but to make it more trustworthy by my collaborators, other researchers from other fields, I need to make it. I need to do this like paradigm shift in my opinion. Actually, we are developing a robot dog. tenure is really the key turn point for me to decide to do something that's really, I mean, I receive a lot of questions. Why do you want to use a robot dog for high throughput phenotyping? I was like, I want more ground data, at least proximal sensing, right? And there are some wheeled robots that don't typically work very well in our environment. So I work with some pathologists who maintain their field very muddy and uneven. So yeah, the all-terrain robot works better in that case. So, but anyways, coming back to this, and the next step is to go to the leaf level. That's so from remote sensing or airborne remote sensing to proximal sensing near ground, and then to the embedded sensing on the plant tissue itself. So I had a very interesting question received from a plant breeder and plant pathologist and also extension specialist who really knows what the farmers needs and also researchers, pathologists needs. He once asked, can you just simply use a smartphone and take a photo of the plant and tell me the pathology, the pathogen on the leaf? I was like, that's really challenging because, I mean, there are so many things in between that we don't know. Yeah, how can we do that? But anyways, his question and several others' question and my personal experience lead me to this near ground sensing these days. So and also that's an expanding of my work from just the drone remote sensing to other remote sensing types. Yeah.
So I will say on the pathogen detection from the leaf, Microsoft with a RAG of the LLM has actually demonstrated pretty good ability to do that for localized results. But since LLMs haven't come up, back to Nathan's questions about math, the best presentation I've seen all this year was at the Blavatnik Symposium, and it was a mathematician who took, I'm going to forget the guy's name, from the 30s, an Indian mathematician, Ramachandran or Rama, took that series of equations, put it into an LLM, and found patterns that nobody knew existed, and was able to actually generate new mathematical equations that can be solved by proofs, right? I think the physics-inspired AI, and especially using maybe some LLMs, is probably the most exciting aspect, and will really allow us to do some of this in the future. So I think some math and some physics, LLMs, and phenotyping, I think that's a very exciting future, being able to combine all those.
Shameless plug. Please attend my talk on Wednesday. Then. Yeah.
Is it the physics, the math, the LLMs? Or? Okay.
All right. Well, let's thank our panel.
Oh, you got it.
That's it. Whoa. Oh, sorry. Oh my gosh. I'm so sorry. You didn't even look behind me. Go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Linda, and I'm coming from the University Putra, Malaysia. I work on coconuts. I'm a breeder. So I think I like the point where the professor says we should consider ground sensing, phenotyping more, and I think that is very true because in my research group, we use the drone to measure the canopy size of coconut, and we have different varieties, but after the imaging and everything, we realized that from the canopy there were no differences in the different varieties, so there was no variation, so that was not good for us as breeders. So we asked the guy, can we come down to other parts of the coconut to do? Then he goes like, how am I going to do that? So I think that part is very good. So we should come down and see other parts that can help us breeders. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, Linda. Okay, great. Thank you, all you panelists.